Sorry.
No worries. Welcome.
Sorry, running a bit late.
Oh no, it's perfect. We're literally just about to start. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So you guys hopefully know me from the emails. Mike Waliniak at Hampden-Sydney College in Virginia. I have been steering committee chair since the inception of this group and have been running this journal club program. And so let's go around and see where people are in terms of their, are they currently a fellow, currently a mentor, are they an alum and just learning more as they go? Where are you guys at? And so start.
Okay, I'll start.
Good, because I don't have your first name there.
Yeah, well, something happened. It's a new computer laptop, so it's different. It's Sabi Malik, and I'm at Howard Botham College of Medicine, and I'm a mentor, and so I've been involved since earlier this year.
Wonderful, welcome, Patricia.
University of New Hampshire at Manchester, and I'm a mentor, and I went undergrad to Old Dominion, which is near you.
You're on the coast. Yeah, we're in the middle of the state, but yeah, much closer to New Hampshire for sure. And Jeremy.
Hey, Jeremy Hsu, mentor at Chapman University. We're in Orange County, California.
Nice. All right, so this is actually our first discussion. We were supposed to have one last Thursday, but it was just me and one other person, so we decided to punt it to this week and get some more people. So this seemed like an especially relevant topic because we asked you guys all to do this. And we are actually, some of us who have been involved in POM for a long time are trying to write up a manuscript about experiences in POM, motivations of people, etc. And we originally intended to do that based on COPUS results and looking at COPUS. And what we found was very much what this group found, was that COPUS does certain cool things, but COPUS also has fairly significant limitations. And if you got the chance to look at the response letter that I also sent out for you guys to look at, it's one of the original COPUS authors basically essentially saying the same thing. Like, don't overuse our blunt instrument and then get angry when it doesn't do what you want it to do, is basically the what I got out of the letter. But we have had, I think, a pretty interesting conversation or debate trying to figure out what we can and cannot do with COPUS data. And that's what this article focuses in on with respect to, in this case, formative assessment. So I think a good sort of first step consideration here is the notion of formative assessment, maybe in your own classes, the idea of what you may or may not be doing to actually figure out as you go along what your students know and what they don't know. So I think I'd like to start there. Sort of what formative assessment practices have you guys been looking at in your own classes, if any, right? That is something I think we're talking about in these mentorships as a consideration of formative assessment. But what do you guys do that might be a good strategy for learning what your students are learning?
Well, pre-COVID.
Right, it all starts with that.
I had, because you ask any questions and they just sit there, they don't say anything, you know?
Yeah, and then they make a big deal in this paper, that doesn't count.
And so also, and then whatever, anyway, we all know that story. And so pre-COVID, my endocrinology class, we, at the end of class, I had them do it in person, and then I had them do it, I had them do it a few ways. Just, you know, what did you learn? And what do you want to go over again? Or what do you want to know more about? Or what are you confused about? I asked it different ways. And so they could either do it, one semester they did it online as a quiz, you know, and they got a couple points just for participating. And then another time I had them do it hard copy. And so they would just sort of slip it to me as they came in, as if it was a secret ballot, which was pretty cute. Actually, that's the first way I did it. And I found, yeah, that's not working. So they had them do it at home. And that worked well because then I would take that, and then the beginning of the next class, I would review whatever they wanted to go over again. So
you were
but now since COVID, it's all asynchronous, and I ask them if they have questions, and they're not. It's back to the way it was. So
yeah. So you're still remote?
yes.
So it sounds like you are deliberate in asking them sort of what did you, like explicitly, like what did you learn? Cool. Okay.
And we have this formative assessment, many of the courses, and those are built in our Canvas Med, where all the course content is. And they're basically MCQ questions, and they can attempt the questions as many times as they want, and there are no grades associated with them. But it is strongly recommended that they complete that, because if they do not know the right answer, all the options have explanations, so they know what the right answer is. And also there's discussion board if they need to discuss on any aspect, or again, they can contact the instructors regarding anything.
So it's not so much of you getting a sense of how they're doing, but they can self.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't sort of monitor how they are.
Okay.
Because typically our courses are really, really short. It's not a semester long. Because I'm in the med school, like for the endocrinology, you're talking about endocrinology, like I'm the course director for endocrinology. It's going to start first week of October, and it's going to end like first week of November. So like 4 hours every day. And so it's and in that we have a midterm and we have a final. So whatever formative it has been between, it's really very fast paced. So we don't do that.
I got you.
Yeah.
Well, that provides a way for the students. I mean, they have to opt into it, but
yeah. They know like where they are, and they are sort of a formative.
Okay. Anyone else? So why did they choose to use formative assessment as a sort of focus in this paper? Well, for the reasons I think that many of us choose to use it. The idea that if I can understand what the students know or don't know along the way, I can, at least hypothetically, change what I'm doing, or maybe alter my plans so that I would be able to make sure that they gain something that they're not gaining from the original version of the class. Right? So COPUS, hopefully we're familiar with the idea of COPUS, right? The idea that we take these videos pre and post in our intervention, and that we look at 2-minute time blocks, and with expertise, you can actually go ahead and get a pretty decent picture of everything that's going on in a room in 2-minute intervals, both from the perspective of the student and the perspective of the instructor. And you can, in this paper, I was actually not familiar with this COPUS Profiles page. This is set up for the purpose of actually going in, recording what has happened with COPUS in your class, and actually going in, uploading the data, and getting a result spit back to you in terms of profiles, in terms of what sort of behaviors is going on in your class as a result. So I thought that was, I was having trouble actually trying to get it to work, just playing with it, but that wouldn't be my first time not being able to figure out an online resource. So I figured that was just me. But so determine that a minimum of 4 classroom observations required to accurately capture a teaching style. Researchers submit their data to COPUS Analyzer, and so you get one of 7 instructional profiles. And so we talk about that a little bit further down here. 3 instructional styles. Basically, is your class completely active, completely didactic, or somewhere in the middle? And those are the basic groups that this thing is trying to put you into based on the profiles that you have developed. So when you look at how we use COPUS for POM, one of the things we realized when we we're working on this paper, and Jamie Morawski has joined us and can say something about this as well, is that the COPUS data in terms of POM is not as consistent as we would want it to be ideally. And that's not a problem when you think about what POM is for and what we hope POM will do. No two POM mentorships are the same. And so what one does is going to come out differently in COPUS depending on the nature of the mentorship. Some of you have experiences that are 3 weeks long. Some of you have experiences that are 3 months long. Some of you took pre and post videos in 2 different classes or with 2 different sections of students. So there are several variables that we introduced into our POM analysis of using COPUS, largely based on the flexibility that I don't think we would go back and sacrifice. I think the flexibility is one of the nice things about our network. And so that definitely hindered us in terms of using COPUS to understand concretely or understand specific patterns of what's going on in the mentorships. What it allows us to do is say, okay, there seems to be more active learning, period. And that's the limit to which we can go. Jamie, anything to add on that in terms of our discussions with the paper? I mean, the manuscript?
Yeah, just really highlighting what this paper is saying, which is, are we using COPUS incorrectly? We've had a lot of discussions with writing the paper in terms of quality versus quantity, and that's really what it boils down to. And I think that's what this paper boils down to, which is COPUS looks at quantity, time of active learning, but it really tells us nothing about the quality of what's going on, or really what's going on at all. Yeah. So when we did a lot of our interviews, we actually went back and re-edited our questions because we weren't getting a lot of that information in terms of, so what were you doing in that 10-minute span of time that it said activity? These codes are very, very broad for COPUS. And that was something that we kind of struggled when we were doing the manuscript, which is, we don't know, it lumps activities and demonstrations and something else all into one category. And we're like, what were you actually doing? I believe, right, Mike, like we really went back and tried to focus on beyond what these codes meant, because I think at some point we realized that the codes were not very helpful. The COPUS codes were not helpful for what we wanted, because they just didn't give us the information that we needed. We could get that from an interview, we could get that from watching the video, but we weren't going to get that from the COPUS codes. So
well, Jamie mentions interviews. In the original conception of this, we weren't even doing interviews at all.
Yeah.
And it's actually very funny, the evolution of this project that we've done, in that we were going to write a paper about COPUS results, and the current iteration we're working on, there's almost no COPUS in it at all. It's like we look at the COPUS and say, okay, here's what it's got, but it's a very minor part of what we're doing, as opposed to what was originally going to be the centerpiece. And it largely speaks, as Jamie has just said, to the limitations of what COPUS can tell. But then this also goes back to the response letter we'll get to. Perhaps this is not COPUS's fault in terms of what we were trying to do with it. So let's take a look at what was done here. We've got instructors teaching 2 different sections of introductory level biology, either in a lecture hall or in a scale-up classroom at a large teaching institution in the upper Midwest that I'm sure is not the University of Minnesota, just a guess. And so looking at these different formats, and Patricia, did you have you had your hand up, go ahead.
I wasn't sure what a scale-up classroom was.
So if this is, again, I'm using my bias, if this was done where I think it was done, there are classrooms that you can set up specifically with active learning in mind. That the seating, for instance, is in pods around monitors in which individual groups can put up a project or put up questions that can be looked at in groups and things like that. Basically, the room is set up to be as optimized as possible for active learning. Does anyone have anything else on that?
Thank you. I've never heard that term before.
Well, I wasn't sure. Like, I'm going in and I'm assuming, and this may be a dangerous assumption. Oh, Jeremy, does this lead us to what it is?
Yeah. I dropped in chat a link to designing scale up classrooms.
Okay, yeah, that's totally what this is. Okay, because I've seen, I've gotten the tour, and maybe some of you have too, of the active learning classrooms at the University of Minnesota, and so that's what I was picturing as they were talking about this. So, thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
All right, so you see here the observations that were made and the classifications that were assigned to these different instructions or these different sessions: didactic, interactive lecture, student-centered. And so this were those three categories I was describing to you. So if your class was much more lecture-centered, you'd fall into the didactic category. If you were sort of a mix of lecture and active learning procedures, you would be an interactive lecture. And then student-centered would be much majority dedicated to active learning techniques, small group activities, for instance, things like that. And so what this is trying to do is consider the style of learning in terms of how a lecture is or a class is taught. It's looking to consider the layout of the classroom, traditional lecture hall versus scale up, in other words, something designed for active learning, and how much of this makes a difference. And can we take the COPUS results and then tie this to a particular style? Can I correlate, basically? If COPUS is telling us something is happening, will that be predictable to a more student-centered style class or a more interactive lecture style class? And so the numbers you see in parentheses are the categories that this thing says or predicts you should have based on the outcomes here. If you guys would excuse me 1 second, I need to open a door for somebody. Okay, I'm back. I'm looking out in the hallway and someone needed me to open the door very quickly. All right, so if we look at this and how COPUS is being utilized, what would you say is the significant thing we should take out of this? Or what do you get out of this as sort of the main consideration or main point? Yeah, Chairman.
I can jump in to share some of my experiences that I think align with what this paper and what
Please.
Carl are saying, because so my Palm Fronds grant was actually for doing COPUS data for our college. And so I've been looking at data from that. So the process was at my institute and then at my mentee's institute to ask for volunteers to share recordings. No one at that institute did, but at Chapman, we got a decent number and we actually put them through the COPUS analyzer to get those clusters.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. And we haven't quite shared them with the faculty yet. We're almost there, but
yeah.
we've done the legwork of that. And I think I've shared it with one colleague whom I'm co-partnering with. She's our director of our CTL. And I think based on the conversations I've had and also I've talked with other people about it, people who aren't familiar with COPUS come in thinking, oh, I'm about to get an observation. Yeah. That's great. You're going to tell me what's good, what's bad about my class. What can I do to improve? And I always have to say, well, wait a second. That's not what COPUS is about. And trying to emphasize what this paper is saying, COPUS is not, I think we're moving right now toward seeing some people use COPUS as a way to judge the quality, as you all mentioned, of someone's teaching when it's really not designed to do that. And I've been trying to putting together a write-up for the faculty, trying to emphasize what it should be used for, to be used for reflection of your own teaching and say, is this what I intended my class to be? Does this match my perceptions of what I taught my class? If so, if not, what can I do to change that? And one paper I found really useful, when doing this, I'll drop this in the chat. For those not familiar with COPUS, I don't know if you've seen this paper from JChem Ed of a guide to how to use COPUS data. It's geared toward chemistry, but I found a lot of the themes very relevant for bio classes as well.
Cool. I'm just like looking at it while you're, oh, it's relatively new too. Cool.
Yeah. So I don't remember what your original question was, Mike, but those are my experiences.
No,
with
this is
COPUS.
good. I mean, it gets to, I'm sort of getting a little ahead of myself and trying to talk about the lack of correlation, but in this figure here, you're not able to take COPUS data and do any correlation to, oh, you know, a particular instructor exhibits a particular style, or a particular room favors a particular style. This is two different instructors. I mean, you will notice that in given sessions, just depending on days, they will show different profiles. They will have different varieties of classes. And so the way we're using it for POM is completely reliant, right, on what pre and what post class we actually choose to use. I certainly don't do the same thing on different days. And so in order to get something that was more meaningful, you would certainly have to come back and look at me repeatedly and get a composite set of data about how I teach. And I think this figure sort of illustrates that in terms of the variety of the types of things you could see at any given point. So how many classes does POM ask for pre and post? I think we just ask for one each. So we're not even trying, we're just trying to get like the base level of, can we show that something has happened that's changed? And I think our experiences over time have shown us that it's inadequate, right? That we would probably, if we were trying to do something more thorough or something more meaningful in terms of student outcomes, to certainly at minimum collect more data. And I think that's what our NSF, gosh, which grant is working on that? Oh, the Vision and Change one is probably trying to get at, right? To actually make those changes to collect that particular information.
So Mike, question for you, because I don't know too much about, like, why did you pick COPUS? And like, what other alternatives were there? Because it seems like overwhelmingly we're like, COPUS isn't super great, even though I know that you did this like 5 years ago or something.
That's
so like,
that's the answer. Right? I'm in another group that's trying to do protein-based cures. And they picked an instrument called the EDAT. Are you familiar with that? It's called the Experimental Design Assessment Test. And it's pre and post. And it gives prompts for the student to propose an experiment. And then you grade it on a scale of 0 to 10 based on 10 different criteria. Every time they match one of the criteria, you get a point. And we decided to use that because, oh, how great, we're trying to do research proposals, experimental design. And now 3 to 4 years later, we're like, God, this tool sucks. Or like, this tool doesn't really tell us all of what we thought it was going to tell us. And so I would plead the same naive level here with COPUS, that when we first got on board with this, over 5 years ago, because remember, we had an incubator before this and some pilot stuff before that. It seemed like a really good tool for what we wanted at the time. And I'm not saying it's useless to us. I'm saying that it doesn't carry nearly the weight we would like it to carry based on experience. If we were simply to re-up for 5 more years of POM, which you can't do, but if we did, I would certainly think we would look for a different assessment tool, or combine this assessment tool with another instrument that we could collect data with.
Well, and I think it's funny because we're kind of going through something at our school in terms of like course evaluations for faculty, and like, we can't figure out how to do them. Like, I know that they've been doing them like since the school existed, but we can't even come up with like a rubric that, or sometimes there's no rubric and you just go in with a blank piece of paper and you just write down things. And I think that is interesting that you know, so many years later, right? And we still don't have a tool that people are happy with in terms of what outcome it is that you're looking for. Maybe we don't know the outcome when we start, the outcome changes.
And we get it and it looks really good. And then like in the practice, it's like, oh, what about this? What about this? Then you have to take it back to the drawing board to accommodate that. And then another, what about this? What about this? I mean, I don't want to chalk it straight up to just humans are tough to work on and call it a day. But I mean, it's that's certainly a lot of it, is that like, it's just really difficult to collect accurate human data. I mean, and God bless the people in psychology that do this for a living, because it seems like a moving target. So here in table 1, you see the codes we're using for looking at types of formative assessment. We sort of touched on these a little bit of what could be done to provide. It could be when I say formative assessment, I don't necessarily mean something as formal as Patricia described to us, of actually passing out paper, collecting the information. This is just very simple, clarifying a question, tweaking in, adding in suggestions for behavioral changes, things like that. Basically, the only line it draws is just the any questions, like doesn't count as formative assessment, but like everything beyond that at least seems to qualify in terms of what they are driving at. And so we get to the meat of the paper basically right here, that we are looking at the different sessions from instructor A and instructor B. We are looking at where we get different, we're looking at the total varieties of feedback that we're given: praise, evaluation, class vote, clarifying, shaping. And what can we see in terms of correlation? The punchline is not much. They try to argue that there's some correlation between the student-centered classification from COPUS and the presence of the shaping. We go back up here, shaping student behavior such as study skills, so that maybe a student-centered class makes a situation more amenable to be able to go in and get that sort of output. But beyond that, they weren't really able to tie anything to a particular mode of learning, that if whether you're didactic, interactive, student-centered, and again, this is where COPUS comes in, the feedback doesn't seem to be dependent on that. So what they're trying to show you here with this graph is basically no correlations, or very little in terms of correlation, which then leads you to the meat of what they're arguing, is the COPUS is not really a good tool for getting at this. And so here you see, I forget what EXP is, prompting students to explore or elaborate on ideas. Do you see a connection here between the different sessions? Not especially. You will notice very interestingly in the didactic environment, instructor B is very good at this. In an interactive environment, instructor A is good at this. And so you could sort of make connections to the individual teaching styles that you have in instructor A and instructor B, and when they would choose to have questions like this in a more straight up lecture setting, or maybe with more Socratic approaches, something back and forth. So again, not something where you see a definitive connection. And so we can keep going with this. Looking at formative, I think I got ahead of myself here. Instructor generates feedback in figure 2, formative assessment prompts in figure 3. And what do we see in terms of Bloom's level or Bloom's categories with formative assessment? Again, the goal is, or not the goal, but the point of the figure is not finding something that there's definitively matched up from one style to one set of formative assessment, right? So once again, nice figures. 3 pairs of class sessions, and so we look at them side by side. What can we get in terms of Bloom's composition, the type of feedback? So just a blow up of the same section here. 2 different instructors, same class, same styles according to COPUS, but the profiles down here pretty different from each other. So just another way of arguing a lack of correlation. So that's the punchline. That we go back to the headline, interpret with caution, that we have these COPUS results, and as Jamie already said pretty nicely, right, what does COPUS tell you, or what does COPUS fail to tell you? And what this paper is trying to make a big deal about is that in terms of formative assessment, in terms of feedback data, things like that, COPUS does not seem to be able to predict what sort of formative assessment would work and not work. In other words, if I have a didactic class, if I have a student-centered class, the styles of formative assessment you're using don't seem to make a difference, frankly. Which prompts this guy here. Oh, that's the wrong figure. That's my other thing. Which prompts this one here by Carl Wieman, who was a leader in COPUS development. And he himself says, this article brings attention to an issue that I've been increasingly concerned about. That issue is the ascribing more meaning to COPUS results than is appropriate or correct. And so here you have a response from one of the actual people who developed COPUS, not saying that what the other paper is saying is wrong, but saying that, well, it was probably never appropriate to think that you were going to get that response in the first place. And so talking about this, it's not a very long thing here. And so echoing the caution expressed by McConnell et al., I note here, COPUS should be recognized for what it is and is not. It is a blunt instrument that is easy to use reliably and captures some aspects of classroom activities that reflect teaching quality, but it misses many others. And so there you have the very COPUS people telling you what we've been saying all along, right? That, yeah, I mean, we agree with this, that COPUS does not do what people are trying to make it do. Another line here, as we developed our own protocol that would meet the constraint of good inter-rater reliability with modest training, we found it necessary to make it simpler and simpler, essentially making it a blunter and blunter instrument. So they could make it more accurate, they could make it more correlative, right, to what they're trying to do, but you're going to need some very highly trained people then to interpret the data. You're going to have to go through a lot more to be able to use the instrument effectively. And so they're telling you here sort of the balance between ease of use, wideness of use, and then the efficacy of what it can do as a result of that ease of use. Everything's a trade-off, right? And so this letter sort of ascribes that trade-off and what can be done and what can't be done with this particular instrument. So I think what I'd like to ask you guys then, given that, are there particular instruments that you guys have found with evaluating your own classes, or particular techniques that you have found that are effective in telling you more about student outcomes, about how your students are actually gaining knowledge or gaining skills in a particular class? What do you guys do to get at those questions? Patricia.
I think it's all over the place. I would like to know what's successful for others.
I mean, I think
we're trying all these different things, and yet we have heterogeneous populations every time we offer, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, the whole thing of learning styles came out a long time ago, and I don't know. It's frustrating. And then the whole throw the student evaluations out because they're so biased, and then we develop new evaluations, and then hardly anyone does them anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to hear from other people what's been successful.
Yeah.
Now, what was the last evaluation you said? Student evaluation, they're biased, and after that you said something else.
Oh, so then we tried a new one starting last year, and it's better, but hardly, maybe 25% of the class fills them out.
Is it on?
And
strictly
what
online?
type of evaluation is that?
It's a course evaluation. And what
Yeah,
they
but what's the difference between student evaluation and the course? I mean, what's the difference?
the same thing that the students are saying, you know.
Did you change the questions between the two, or did you simply move it online?
No, all the questions were changed, and it was
Okay.
based on a lot of data that made them less biased. And
Okay. The reason when you said 25% return rate, I'm like, oh, that would be the optional online thing that we've gone through here, that we have trouble getting people to do their evaluations. You have to come up with some clever ways to get them to fill it out. So that when you gave me that low return, that's the first thing I thought of.
Yeah.
But it's beyond that then, in terms of like, students get survey fatigue, as we know. And so what can we design that the students are willing to take, that is short, that is effective, that is unbiased? There's all these things at the same time, right? Then there's the question, of course, of what you actually want the students to get. We were having a different group had this conversation yesterday. Are you looking for content? Are you looking for experience? Are you looking for something in between? Like if I'm Sabi in a medical environment, the content is probably way more important than in my small liberal arts, intermediate level class, where I may be looking to focus on experience and getting people confidence in science. And so what I choose to assess would be the first question to ask. But then once I figure that out, what do I use to figure out if I am doing it well? And if it's not just content, if it's content, right, you can do a pre-test, post, excuse me, pre-test, post-test. You can embed some questions in a final exam. You can see how people are doing on that, and that would give you some data. When it comes to figuring out if they are learning better, if they are becoming better as scientists, right, those are more like self-assessment questions, or how do you feel questions, which come with their own biases, right? That people definitely tend to feel smarter or feel like they can do something more, but then do they, right? I said bad things about the EDAT before, but as a blunt instrument, the EDAT is pretty good at giving you an idea if the students are improving in their ability to ask questions. The problem with the EDAT was the very specific checklist you had to go through in terms of, did they do this, did they do this? I think if you altered those parameters and focused them more on particular things related to coming up with a testable, falsifiable question, doing something that can be done in replicates, are they considering a placebo, things like that. You could actually get some useful data about experimental design, but you'd have to tweak what's there. So that's a long-winded way of saying figuring out what you actually care about, and from there dive in and see what other people have come up with in their classes.
Well, and we've had the same issue, as I said before, in terms of just having people come, and I mean, I'm junior faculty, so I'm supposed to have people come in and evaluate, and we do go back and forth about content versus teaching style. And if it's about content, then I should have somebody who has my area of expertise come into my class and tell me if I'm teaching the content right, regardless of how. And if it's somebody who, is more interested in how I'm interacting with the students, then I don't want a content person. I want somebody from a different department to come in. And we really can't, as a college, decide which one is more important for promotion and tenure. Are we more concerned about the experience the students are getting, because then you want the outside people? Or do you want to make sure that you're covering the content, and then you want to get, the subject matter experts in and make sure you're not like lying to them? Hopefully you're not lying. But I mean, those are really the two that we keep on going back and forth, which is why we can't come up with a rubric and we can't figure out who to come in and evaluate, because we can't even get to the bottom of what is the purpose of the course evaluation that we're using.
Jeremy, what do you guys use?
We have our student evaluations of teaching as usual. We actually have those done. We're required to have them done in class. And so our response rate tends to be pretty high.
I
But-
brought mine back into class for that same reason. That was the only way to get a good return.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the trade-off, of course, is it's 10 minutes of class time that I have to give up, the last week of class
Yeah, there is
for that. So there's that trade-off. But yeah, we do that. And then we have peer observations as well. It's interesting you bring up that split, Jamie, between content versus teaching. It's an interesting philosophical discussion. Although I'm surprised that, just reflecting on our form, it's all about teaching. It's not about content. And I guess I'm assuming that if I'm observing someone, that I'm assuming that they have a PhD in that area. I'm assuming that they would know that they're a content expert. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I haven't seen a teaching evaluation form at my institute that takes into account content before. But it does bring a good point of, yeah, like, should you get feedback on how much is this class covering? Is this class at a broader level covering the main concepts related to the topic that you're supposed to cover, right? Are these learning objectives for the class actually sufficient for the topic you're teaching, if you're teaching intro bio or intro something else, right? But yeah, I think ours airs much more on the side of one-time observation, just on teaching, not on content.
Yeah, the only reason why content, at least for me, because I teach upper division undergrad courses that are much more specialized. So that's why I think that they're more concerned about the content level. I mean, technically, so I'm in a chem department, technically we could do like ACS exams with the students. We're not ACS certified, so why give an extra exam if we don't have to? But yeah, so that's why I think that the content aspect becomes a lot more important, because it is the 300, 400, 500 level classes that I teach.
Yeah, and if you're teaching those upper level classes, the odds are some of the content is going to be more important for whatever assessment vehicle you choose to use, for sure.
So one thing, kind of going back to the paper, Michael, and I didn't read the original paper where it said that 4 was like the magic number of observations.
Oh,
and I found that so hard to believe. Like, every single one of my classes is different. Like, my Monday class could look totally different from my Wednesday, which could look totally different from my Friday within the same class and the same students. And that's just like 1 week. So I found this concept of like 4 being the magical number, and I'm just like very skeptical with that. And I guess I kind of wanted to know other people's thoughts, if they read that and was like 4, or if they read that and was like, oh, okay.
Or 4 taken at very different times. Like, yeah, like, are they all taken at once? Are they taken a week at a time? Those are interesting questions, aren't they? Yeah.
Well, and I think back to like some of the POM projects, and mine was a flipped classroom. So technically it should be 100% discussion based, but then you could go into my other classroom, which is more lecture based because it's not flipped. But like, I'm sure people here organize their more like didactic courses to be like, some days we have like full day activities where I don't talk and they just do worksheets. And then some days it's probably like 75% lecture based. So I'm wondering, again, thinking about this, like only 4, and if they were, I think it said that they were randomly selected, but again, every single class of mine, I feel like is so drastically different that just when you think of maybe 3 classes meeting for an hour a week times 16 weeks, like 4 is a very, very small percentage.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's arguable, right? In terms of like getting an accurate profile. And as always, I mean, like, we get on our intro student for doing this, right? Like, you just say, oh, more data is better. Yeah, sure, more data is better. But like, is there a way, is 4 the true threshold, right? To be able to go in and say, this is how my profile is. Yeah, it's a fair question.
I was going to jump in and say, I agree with that point where, yeah, 4 felt like an arbitrary number, but I also see their point of saying how much of this is driven by convenient sampling of making this feasible for the evaluator. So for my Franz project, we asked for 4 recordings because of that paper. mainly because we didn't want to overwhelm the undergraduate doing all this. But I felt the same thing. And some colleagues sent two recordings from 2 different classes, which raises another whole host of questions of like upper level versus lower division class. How should we, we end up not merging them together, but saying how comparable someone's teaching style from one class to another. It's so context dependent. So I had the exact same thought as you, Jamie.
I mean, everything just seems like it's so apples and oranges. And then the population that you get each year is different too.
Right.
I mean, we try our best, but it's hard. It's very difficult.
I mean, that's sort of the punchline of the whole thing, right? That I think a way to think about it would be like we have an ideal of what the class can and should look like. And then given the hand you're dealt each year with your students, you try your best to get to that point. But clearly, you're going to have to twist how you do it each year to arrive there. Like there's no one true path that's always going to work, which is somewhat discouraging take-home message, but probably the accurate one.
And I think as far as promotion and tenure, what they're looking for is an evolution in your teaching.
Yeah.
Right. Not first year, I know what I'm doing and I'm going to stick with it forever.
Exactly. You flexibility.
That's not a good look.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else on this paper today? I will say this is something that I've been kicking around the last couple of days, and I want to work with Michael more to see if we can implement it. I'd like to try to put these papers up on our Slack channel and open up a discussion board so people can actually put questions down and we can encourage some asynchronous conversation. We've been trying to get people onto our Slack channel anyway, and this seems like a good approach to drumming up some more long-term conversations on this and some of the other papers we're going to be looking at. Exactly. Yes, we do indeed have a Slack channel. This was an experiment that Michael tried and it didn't go very far, so I think we stopped telling people about it. So yeah, you should hopefully hear about that in the near future, and we can have some additional opportunities to ask questions with people who can't be at these sessions. Okay. Well, thank you guys for coming today. Very much appreciate it. And if you have, I always end with this, if you have ideas for papers, do not hesitate to send them to me. We like to have you guys contribute to the content that we look at in this in these sessions. All right.
Great.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.